everybody to the Introduction to Psychedelic Research and Harm Reduction for the Deaf Community. And my name is Dr. Lani Roy, and my sign name is Lani. Before we begin, I'd really like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we're all from around Australia. And as we do this, you may like to remember, visualise a really important space in Australia for you. Might be the sea, a water body, the sky, a mountain, somewhere in Australia which makes you feel at home and feel connected. Also like to acknowledge all the elders and medicine altars around the world that have used psychedelics and plant medicines by the teepee, in the fire, in the jungle, and in their communities for healing and sacred purposes. And as these medicines move rapidly around the world, may we bring them into the clinical space and into our communities with integrity and integrating science and the sacred. So my name's Dr. Lani Roy. I'm a psychologist and social worker, an advocate and a researcher. I have a diploma of AUSLAN, and I've been a psychotherapist for the last 15 years. I've worked with the deaf and deafblind community and the disability sector, and I also have lived experience of trauma and psychedelics. The Signs of Life is the practice that I run in Melbourne, and it's a national-based services, and it's inspired by clinical theory, so the science, but also the sacred, so wisdom, traditions, and spiritual practices. We provide a range of services such as psychological assessment, therapeutic interventions, report writing, research, advocacy, and education, and more recently, clinical psychedelic services. We offer self-care preparation and integration programs for people who are using psychedelics in the community, integration circles to support people to make the most out of those experiences. We work with CBD and THC referrals and support clinical trial development, as well as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is a legal service, a ketamine service, available in Australia. Just want to acknowledge the complex context that we're in at the moment, and we are advocates for decriminalisation of the signs of life. We are passionate about people not being punished for their choices with substances. We also do not specifically encourage you to go out and break the law or take psychedelics. We want you to be really safe and to know your own legal context. And we also want to acknowledge that these medicines have been used for thousands of years all around the world in Indigenous communities. It's legal in many countries, and people use them in ceremonial, clinical, solo-guided processes. We just encourage you to talk to your GP or psychologist about your medical condition and make sure you're safe and get the support you need. So we're here today to explore psychedelics and make this accessible for the deaf community in AUSLAN, and so that we can all have access to update treatment and knowledge and research that's happening in our community. So what is a psychedelic? The word psychedelic is a Greek word. It means psyche, which means mind, and delos, which means manifesting. So we believe that psychedelics can really manifest our mind and help us to explore different aspects of ourselves. There's classic psychedelics, such as psilocybin, mescaline, DMT, 5-MeO DMT, and LSD. We'll cover some of these today. And there's also really rare molecules as well that are starting to gain more popularity. Psychedelics typically have, if they're taken in the right set and setting and with medical guidance and in safe places with safe people, they are typically non-addictive. They have low physical toxicology, which means they're typically safe for the body. They can help you explore your consciousness and experience transcendent, peak, and mystical experiences. Just to paint a bit of a context, psychedelics have been around since ancient Greek times, and they have been used all around the world in South America, in the jungle. And before the Nixon declared war on drugs in the 70s, there was actually a lot of legal psychedelic research. It was happening all around the world in various forms with couples therapy, with LSD and MDMA, and it was being recognised as an actual treatment for mental health and trauma. But then there was a war on drugs, which was declared by President Nixon at the time, and a banishment of psychedelic science and research until today. So we've had a real block in the science, and many people believed that these blocks wasn't due to scientific evidence, but due to political ideology and potentially punishing people from lower socio-economic groups that occurred in the 60s and the 70s. But now there's been a boom of research, and it's really exciting times here in Australia. Just to paint a picture, psychedelics are used for many different reasons. Some people to celebrate, such as rituals, and to mark seasons of change, the winter solstice and summer equinox. People do them for different transitions, births, deaths and marriages, different cultures around the world. Also for physical reasons, to work through physical trauma and emotional blocks in the body, for chronic pain. Also to improve relationships, such as couples therapy. People also explore the creational space at raves and festivals and through the arts. And more recently, the clinical context of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. As we can see in this picture, psychedelics have been utilised in ceremony in Mexico, North America, Central Africa, in celebration and in ritual. And it's been used in ancient ways for many, many years, but it's only starting to become popular in the West. And we have so much to learn from these Indigenous knowledge keepers. And what's happening in the world today? It has gained so much popularity through the Netflix show How to Change Your Mind, based on a novel by Michael Pollan. He has been a prolific writer in this space and really brought this to the mainstream. We've got psychedelics and mental health care booming, private investors, different colleges from around the world, and a lot of neuroscience and cutting-edge technologies such as virtual reality and psychedelics merging. Many, many different organisations and universities and sectors are coming together to design novel treatments for mental health. Because we can all agree there's far too much suffering in this world, and the treatments we have currently are quite limited. They're expensive, they often take a lot of time to get better, and with medication there can be a lot of side effects, as well as people not necessarily processing their trauma, but more of a block or a band-aid to help them maintain their well-being. And what we want at the Signs of Life is for people not to just be coping with their mental health, but to be processing and thriving and moving through it. So in Australia, we have many trials occurring. St Vincent's Hospital was one of the first to do psilocybin for the dying, for people who've got cancer. We've got now people looking at MDMA for alcoholism and PTSD, CBD for anxiety disorders in youth, DMT for major depression, and psilocybin for anorexia, depression, and existential distress. So the Australian government has got on board by donating 15 million initially for psychedelic trials, and it's a really exciting time in the research community because government officials and organisations are getting on board with the psychedelic science. Here we have a slide of some of the key players in the field in Australia. We've got the Australian Psychedelic Society, which is a really grassroots, community-based organisation. We've got Psyche Institute, which is really passionate about working with ayahuasca and DMT. We have Silo, which is an organisation really focused on the hard science of the molecules and really proving if they're safe and getting their risk profiles. We have Ignosis, which focuses on VR, technology and psychedelics. Entheogenesis Australis, which has been around for decades, providing grassroots knowledge to botanists and community members to grow plants such as cactus. A really incredible organisation for community and conference events. And we have PRISM, Psychedelic Research and Science, which is involved in a lot of clinical trial protocol development and keeping us up to date with the latest scientific news. And Ananda Clinics, which is a fantastic example of legal cannabis services that are providing the best care and conscious cannabis use that I'm aware of in Australia. So what are some of the potential positive effects of psychedelics? Psychedelics can cause our mind to dissolve, which for some can be very scary. But what we know with mental illness, such as depression and anxiety, we need to get outside of our minds for those issues to dissolve and for our boundaries of self and others to change. And psychedelics can give us that opportunity to let go and to experience a new way of being for our rumination, our obsessions, our depressive thinking to dissolve and be disrupted. And with the therapy, the therapist can help you create a new story and new goals to reorientate your mind. We also know that psychedelics can improve empathy. People that typically start exploring altered states tend to feel more compassion for the world and their environment and their friends, even for themselves, and increased empathy for their trauma and their life story. Psychedelics can help us feel awe, more connected to nature and the arts, to spirituality, to meaning in life, and help us face death and what it means to be alive and engaged in the mystery. We also know that psychedelics can really help activate the imagination and connect us to the beauty in the world, and also change our relationship with suffering. Suffering is always going to be here, we're humans, but psychedelics, unlike typically antidepressants or medications, tend to catalyse people into new ways of being, into a different way of interacting with the world and suffering and their belief systems. What are some of the longer term effects that we've become aware of through the research? Is that connected to self, others and nature, feeling more unity and oneness and less alone and isolated, more care and consideration for the environment, and also pro-social behaviour, concern for others, more open-minded political views, and also an openness to tolerance and the difficult challenges in life. So where are we up to in the science at the moment? Currently, there's many trials that are going through phase 1, 2 and 3 clinical trials. And at the moment in America, MDMA, which is typically known as ecstasy and Molly and different street names, but it is actually the pure version, the safe version, is in its phase 3 trials, which means that they anticipate in America in 2024 that MDMA will be rolled out through their pharmaceutical benefit scheme to be a legal treatment for treating PTSD, which is incredible progress given this drug or medication was perceived as being dangerous and banned from society. We're now seeing through the science that it's being researched just like any other drug, and once it passes those checks and balances, it will be available in America, and we anticipate Australia will follow soon after. Ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is available legally in Australia if you have a referral from your psychiatrist, and cannabis-assisted psychotherapy is also available because CBD and THC are legal with a script. But all other medications at the moment are illegal, and we're waiting for the TGA to reschedule them through the scientific process. So what is the process of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy? Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is a combination of the psychedelic with multiple sessions with a trained therapeutic team, typically a psychologist and a psychiatrist or a GP and a psychotherapist, that support you throughout your whole treatment. You get the therapy as well as the medication in a controlled medical setting. And we've seen many countries around the world begin psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, such as Switzerland, we've got America, we've got Israel, and now Australia. We have these trials occurring all over Sydney and Adelaide, as well as Melbourne and various other states. Before we launch into psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, I just want to talk about some of the risks and complexities of psychedelics, because it's not for everyone. We know that people with bipolar disorder might be at risk if they take psychedelics because it could make them more manic. We also know that people who have severe personality disorders or processes, that these medications might not help them. There is a saying that in order to lose your mind, you need to have a mind to come back to. So these medicines are very powerful, and there needs to be a certain level of safety for them to work and for people to get the most benefits out of them and to be able to be safe and stable. So other conditions such as schizophrenia and psychosis are currently excluded from the trials. And if anyone has experienced current domestic violence or sexual abuse, or has lack of stable housing, or other complex medical conditions such as heart disease, because what we want to ensure is that people are safe when they take these medicines and they're able to integrate the messages and the images and the lessons that they get. And to be able to do that, there needs to be a certain level of safety, which is assessed by your treating team. So we'll explore MDMA in more detail. MDMA is said to decrease the fear response in the body. So when people have MDMA, they are typically more open to talking about their PTSD, their trauma. They feel safe in their body to be able to talk about their memories and childhood abuse. And this is unlike any other medication that we have on the market to date. And this is why it's being rolled out quicker than the others. We're finding that people are able to tolerate really complex issues, and with the therapist support, heal the memories and actually get a release from their trauma. Some of the possible risks of MDMA is that if it's taken on the street, it can be mixed with other chemicals and it might not be safe. So we are advocating for medical controlled MDMA, which is pure, it's safe for the body, it's non-addictive, and when it's done in the right situation, we can mitigate risks. We do know that some people can experience complex emotions and crying and nausea and have difficulties processing some of the feelings that come up in session. But with the therapist, this is why they're there, is to help people to regulate and support them to process that. But it is a really safe medication when done in a clinical setting. And how does it work with the psychotherapy? Well, MDMA can amplify the results of the psychotherapy. It can take years for people to develop trust with their therapist and to open up about complex trauma, but MDMA makes it a lot quicker and a lot easier. It provides trust and empathy, extroversion. People who really struggle to be open are given a window of opportunity to talk, and it's been trialled for autism as well, so to help people with communication challenges to open up. It actually decreases fear in the amygdala, in the brain, so veterans from war can actually talk about the event without being triggered back into the past. They're able to stay present and get the support they need. And people tend to have the capacity to share overwhelming feelings without dissociating and without harming themselves or blanking out. So it's a really great medicine for processing the really hard stuff. And MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelics in America that is doing all these trials on MDMA, and they're finding it to be really effective. It's got an excellent safety record for PTSD, and that's for people who have severe and chronic PTSD. On average, they had it for 17 years, and when they did this medication, had really statistically significant results in the phase 3 trials. So now we'll move on to ketamine, which is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is something we offer at the Signs of Life with a team of medical professionals. It's been used for pain for many, many years, but now we're realising it can be used for psychedelic therapy for depression and trauma. So it's legal with a referral from your psychiatrist, and typically you have multiple rounds. Can be done through intramuscular or IV injection. Some people even have nasal sprays or lozenges. So there's different ways of taking ketamine. It's a dissociative, which means people typically feel like they're leaving their body. Time and space is stretched. People can have physical, visual reactions, but typically it's an out-of-body experience. And why is this helpful for people? We have found through a therapy called internal family systems therapy that when people are allowed to safely dissociate from their body, their defense mechanisms dissolve, and then trauma can come forward, repressed memories, anger, sadness, grief, loss. All these feelings are allowed to come to the forefront of the conscious mind. Then the therapist can help them work through that in the talk sessions. Ketamine is also really effective for suicidal thinking and is often given to people who are suicidal. So it's one of the few psychedelics that we know is safe to give people when they are suicidal because it has a short-acting antidepressant mechanism which can help people to get out of that depressed suicidal mind and open up into hope. Ketamine is one of the only psychedelics that is potentially addictive, so you need to be cautious of that, and that's why the medical team will ensure that people are only allowed a certain amount of sessions and potential maintenance sessions, but that's in line with the government to make sure that people do not get addicted. And again, ketamine it can be powerful with psychotherapy because it helps people feel sadness and hurt and panic and grief, but in a safe container, and remove any blocks and barriers that people have put up over the years when there have been, too painful to delve into their trauma history. So it's a great opener for talk therapy. And we have CBD and THC, which are two molecules that are legal in Australia with a script from your GP, and it's now prescribable for so many things, ranging from anxiety, depression, autism, different autoimmune conditions, cancer, as well as for pain and for sleep issues. And it's a very widely used medication, and we really need to break down the stigma of cannabis use, because when it's used consciously, people can have incredible healing. And typically it's prescribed as an oil, can be prescribed in a vape, with flower or with oil as well. So there's different ways of working with cannabis to suit your needs. And we say that these two oils can work to create balance in your body. So CBD can be very grounding. It isn't psychoactive, so you can take CBD without the THC and still legally drive. And CBD is used to help regulate the body for sleep, for calmness, for general health and well-being. And THC is the active component in the plant, the psychoactive component. People can have psychedelic journeys on THC, or they can take a small amount, which is below threshold, which can just help with their nervous system. Again, we want to be really careful with THC because for some people who have mania or bipolar, it might be a risk factor. There's still a lot of unknowns about this plant, and many people use it safely, but it's always best to chat with your professional to make sure it's safe for you. So we will now explore LSD, which is lysergic acid, street name acid. It was very popular in the 60s and the 70s during the anti-Vietnam War era. It was also one of the most widely researched molecules until the Nixon era shut down the science. It's a long molecule. It can last up to 12 hours, but it is being researched around the world. And some of the samples are really diverse. They're looking at LSD with anxiety, with or without life-threatening illnesses, alcohol use disorder, and neurotic symptoms. See, LSD, it really opens people up to diversity and to lots of colour and artistic endeavours. It's a very expansive molecule, and people that tend to take LSD start to open up to different ways of thinking and seeing in the world. It can really help to amplify the unconscious. So if you have something that you're running from, you're hiding from, that you're blocking, LSD tends to magnify that, which can be very challenging for people if they're not in a supported environment. They need to be safe and have people to debrief with and talk to, because it is such an expansive molecule. It can really help people with social engagement and empathy, and also helps impair fear, and this is why it's been also looked at for autism as well. LSD in psychotherapy, it can help you feel closer to others, to break down the structures of your mind. A lot of mental health conditions lock people into ways of thinking, being really depressed or negative, gloomy, feeling like the world is over, there's nothing to live for. LSD can open people up to the magic that's out there in the world and the beauty. It can help people to feel warmth towards themselves and work on shame, and to open their mind to other ways of thinking. We call that neuroplasticity. So people's minds start to be more flexible, which is a big indicator of health and well-being, if you can have an open and flexible mind. And people that work with LSD tend to start being more creative through the arts, through music, through painting, and through other creative endeavours. And we have psilocybin, which is also known as magic mushrooms, which are grown widely around Australia, but they're actually illegal to take at the moment. But they are being used for trials in Australia for existential distress, for people who are dying, for depression, for addiction, and various other conditions. Psilocybin has a long history in Indigenous cultures, and it is a powerful medication which really opens people up to the transpersonal field. Many people who are atheist or agnostic before doing psilocybin tend to report having mystical experiences of God, of different dimensions, spirits, allies, totems, and it's a very expansive medication, very visual for some and physical, and has huge potential for depression, breaking people's obsessive compulsive disorders, and addiction. And many people around the world are exploring psilocybin for addiction because it tends to help people break down those patterns and those clutches that keep people small and in those harmful behaviours. And it really helps break people's habitual ways of thinking. And people who tend to work with psilocybin, again, more open-minded, creative, and develop neuroplasticity and flexibility in their mind. Psilocybin is also being used to explore anxiety and depression for cancer patients, for, as I said, alcohol use disorder, as well as migraines and cluster headaches. So it's got quite a diverse profile. And they're also looking at it for eating disorders and body dysmorphia. What we know is when people don't like their bodies and they get obsessed on how they look and feel, they can get stuck in those patterns for years. And current medications are proving to not really be able to address that underlying problem. What we're finding with psilocybin is people can be catapulted out of their body, and they can start to see that they're more than their body. They're more than their mind even, and that they're part of this oneness that is available to them. And with that, the disorders and the diseases start to shift and change. Psychotherapy is really powerful for psilocybin because it can help stabilise some of those changes and help people to stay on track with self-care and for creativity and processing any trauma that they're working through. I just want to show you this slide. It's really quite powerful, this image of a brain scan. We've got a placebo, so someone who hasn't been given psilocybin, and we also have a brain of someone who has been given psilocybin. And what we know is that there's a mechanism in the brain called the default mode network, and that's responsible for your personality, for rumination, for fixed ways of knowing. And a lot of people who have mental illness have a really strong default mode network. They spend a lot of their time in their mind and in their head and going in circles. What psilocybin does, it actually shuts off the default mode network. That goes offline, and people can experience what's called an ego death, where they actually don't know who they are, where they are, what's going on. This, for some, can be incredibly beautiful and empowering. For others, it can be very distressing, and that's why it's wise to have therapists and support around you. But what we do know is when the default mode network is shut down and people go through the ego death, your entire brain, neural pathways light up. And in this process, that's when the neurogenesis and the cognitive flexibility starts to happen. So it's quite an incredible scientific finding. We know that with that difficulty and pain of the ego death, that it's actually really healthy for the brain. And it can be seen as a reboot, another chance at being in the world, and an opportunity for great growth, particularly if you've got the therapist supporting you along the journey to help you stabilise. So like any medication or medicine, psilocybin can have side effects. It can be very scary. People can report having bad trips and hallucinations and imagery that they were frightened of, hellish or very, discombobulating, as we say, very confusing. But what we know from the psychedelic literature is if you have support and if you're able to find meaning for those messages, if you can find a way to face them and integrate them, those bad trips don't remain bad trips. They tend to be people's biggest points of change. So it's about having the right support to really work through that content. And ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is one of my personal passions. It was what began my whole career in this space when I went to the jungle and drank ayahuasca for my own spiritual purposes. And it completely changed my life and is why I'm here today making this video. And we offer a lot of ayahuasca preparation and integration support services because it is one of the bigger medicines. It's very, very strong. It lasts for up to 8 hours. It's a shamanic medicine, so it's legal in most areas of South America, and even in churches in America, you can legally do ayahuasca, which not a lot of Christians in Australia even know about, that there's Catholic churches that drink ayahuasca legally. In different places around the world. So it is a combination of plants that activate in the belly and to create DMT. So typically it's drank in the dark, in ceremony with a shaman, a medicine person who is trained to sing traditional ikaros, which are songs, and it's a very strong medicine which requires a lot of discipline. You've got to prepare your body for it. No salt and no alcohol, sugars and fats. People have a really, really clean diet before they take ayahuasca. You also can't have any antidepressants. It's quite serious to have psychiatric medications with ayahuasca. So in the community, there needs to be a lot of awareness about making sure that if you are drinking ayahuasca, that you are not on any medication that contraindicates it. Ayahuasca has many, many properties to it. It can be an anti-inflammatory for arthritis. It's being looked at for dementia, for neurogenesis, for depression, for addiction, for trauma. It has many, many purposes, and it's also being researched in Australia with the Psyche Institute for an adapted version of ayahuasca to make it appropriate for the clinical context. Ayahuasca is typically drank, as mentioned, in a maloka, in a traditional hut or centre, in shamanic cultures, in circles, with community elders and people who've been really trained in the lineage. Typically it is done in the dark, but there are different traditions that also sing and dance and do it in the daytime. And it typically is a community medicine where people take it in a circle together with a lot of different instruments, different tools and resources for the medicine healer to work with the energy in the room. And in shamanic culture, they really do feel that they're bridging the worlds, the upper, lower and the middle world, through the use of ayahuasca. So this medicine is really bound with a lot of cultural context to it. But Psyche, which is an organisation in Australia, is making different adaptations to ayahuasca, looking at the acacia tree, which is an Australian indigenous tree that has DMT in it, that has the psychoactive component. And Psyche is working with Indigenous communities in Australia to see what they can do to bring these medicines to the mainstream, but also to have that cultural connection and appropriateness with the Australian community. So ayahuasca has been looked at for treatment-resistant depression, for addiction. It's been used in the jungle for many, many soldiers all around the world who serve and experience complex PTSD, and their traditional medications are just not working for them. There's a lot of research centres and therapeutic centres in the jungle which are taking people from all around the world, and it is legal in these spaces. And encourage you to do your research, because although these medicines are legal, there's always room for risk and for complexity. You want to make sure that you're picking the right centre, really good reputation, and with some Western staff as well, so you can help kind of integrate what's going on there in the jungle. We also know that ayahuasca can be powerful in combination with psychotherapy, because again, it's such a powerful medicine. It opens people up to visions, to spiritual realms, to ancestors, to their bodies, their personal and relational world. And you really need to be debriefing and having support with people to help stabilize that. Ayahuasca can be extremely complex. It can bring up trauma, intense images. It can be very fast. People typically purge and they vomit during ayahuasca. It's a medication that actually makes you purge. But what we find is that people actually clear out what they're holding back. So you're not just vomiting for no reason. You're actually purging up shame and anger and guilt and trauma. And then typically afterwards you feel really energized and really, really healthy, and like there's been a huge release from the medicine. We also have mescaline, which is another medicine that's been used in shamanic cultures. So you've got San Pedro, which is a cactus, and peyote, which is a cactus as well. Peyote is a very sacred medicine which is not to be really used outside of the lineage, because they believe that you are drinking their ancestors when you drink that medicine. You're actually communing with their ancestors. So it's not a popular medicine or plant to just take and sell around the world. It actually has quite serious spiritual and cultural ramifications. But the San Pedro cactus there's much more of that. It's actually, you find it in a lot of Australian gardens. It's not illegal to grow San Pedro. It's everywhere once you become aware of it, but it's still illegal in Australia to cook it and drink it. That's when it becomes a drug or a medicine. So mescaline is typically in a cultural setting used by a teepee. San Pedro is drank by fire with shamans, very popular in the Andes and in Peru. And it's known as grandfather sky, and it's often used with ayahuasca as well. Not on the same day, but they're often used in combination. So people might drink ayahuasca, which is known as Mother Earth, has a female energy to it, and then a couple of days later they might have grandfather sky, the San Pedro. And together they're said to help people experience both energies, the male and the female, and help bring them into balance. So San Pedro, it lasts many hours, up to 14 hours. It's known as a heart opener. So it's a little bit like MDMA in that sense, that people typically become more connected with their feelings and their body, more able to talk and feel emotions, and have a lot of somatic releases. They can cry, they can release, can feel very dreamlike, euphoric. People can get visuals, but it's not as visual as ayahuasca, for example. San Pedro can be drunk, and people go on long walks and hikes traditionally as well. And it can be used for celebration of seasons, summer and autumn, and those transitional points. It's been looked at for depression and anxiety and PTSD and addiction. And again, it's typically taken in a community setting, which has incredible healing properties to drink with, if they're safe people, talented artists, on lands in the environment. And this is really incredible medicine for, particularly if people are too scared to take psilocybin or ayahuasca, some of those bigger medicines. San Pedro is known to be more grounding because some of the time you really do know who you are and where you are, but you're still in an altered state. And we have DMT as well. DMT has been used for rituals for thousands of years. DMT is found in different plants like the acacia plant in Australia, and also it can be made synthetically in the lab, which is why they're looking at it for trials. And it has a really good safety profile. So if it's done in the right setting, it's really safe for the body. But again, it's very powerful, very visual. People often see fractals and different dimensions and report different spiritual, even alien encounters. And for some, that's really challenging. But for others, it can help them, get beyond their trauma or their suicidal mind or their fear of death, and really open them up to different landscapes. We also have ibogaine, which is a psychedelic that is even found, it's found in the West African shrubs, and it's legal in many countries around the world. It is a very long-lasting medication. It goes for 30 hours, and it's one of the psychedelics that you need to be careful of if you've got heart conditions. It's not recommended if you've got serious heart conditions, and any treatment centre that uses this needs to be screening rigorously for cardiac. But it is being used widely for addiction, and it's having pretty strong impacts for alcoholism and other addictions. It's been used in Brazil for treating addiction with psychotherapy as well, and they're looking at it in Australia as well, particularly for things such as nicotine craving and heroin and opioids and some of those more difficult substances to heal from. So now we're just going to dig a little bit deeper into psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy and harm reduction. Why is psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy so critical at this point in our mental health system? What we know is that therapy alone, although is great, can take a really, really long time for people to get better and to build trust and to be able to work through trauma. We also know that medications have a lot of side effects and sometimes just don't even work for people. So we're at a point in history where the government, the scientific community, we're all coming together to explore these novel treatments. What's really unique about psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is you have some of the most powerful substances on the planet that can open people up to a window of flexibility, of change, and it's the combination of the pharmacology and the therapist and the set and setting, the container in which the therapy occurs in. So there's 3 distinct phases. There's the preparation. This happens before anyone does psychedelics. They need to prepare their mind, their body, their spirit, their family about what's going to happen. This phase can take years for some. It's really important that people consider their risks, their goals, what their intentions are. Is their body healthy enough? Do they have secure home? Is their family supportive? You really want to prepare yourself for the best outcomes. Then there's the acute experience, which is the dose setting. And of course, prior to this, in the psychedelic scene, you have assessments, you have your therapy sessions, you have your screening. So by the time you have go in for the acute experience, you know that you're ready as much as you can be, and you're safe, and the doctors have screened you appropriately. In this period, you typically have 2 therapists with you for the day, for up to 8 hours, and they are there to help the medicine unfold. A lot of it is non-directive, so they actually sit back and allow the medicine to take its course. And there's music, there's sensory items, there's art, there's different things in the room to help you feel supported and creative. In MDMA therapy, there's typically more talking, because people who have MDMA want to talk about their trauma, whereas the other psychedelics, people typically close their eyes and wear an eye mask and journey in and spend hours just in their own mind working through their trauma and through the visuals. And then when they need support, they can engage with the therapist. And then the integration phase. This is really specific, because without integration, it may just be a peak experience that goes nowhere. It is about taking the insights, the lessons, the memories, and making meaning out of it. What does it mean for your life, for your family, for your mental health? So it's not just about doing the drug, it's about stabilizing it into your personality, into permanent change. So psychedelics don't guarantee positive change or transcendent experiences, but they are contextual experience enhancers. So what it means is the medicine alone won't do the work. It's a combination. It's a combination of you and what you bring, what you're willing to do to make this happen, your support team, the therapists, the room, the music, the lighting, all of it. It's a very context-specific and sensitive process. That's why it needs to be done by really, really skilled facilitators and guides. You also have the opportunity to be more open, enhanced learning, an increased emotional tone, and to open up your belief system. So it's really important that you're around people that can help you unpack this without judgment, without shame, without closing you down. Some of the harm we see in the community is when people do psychedelics and then they go home to an abusive partner, or a workplace that isn't supportive, or a hospital system that has no idea how to respond to psychedelics. So it's not necessarily the psychedelic that's the issue, but the context around it. And that's why we place so much importance on it. So from a harm reduction perspective, because we know there's many people in the community, as well as deaf people, using psychedelics, using substances. So as this takes off around the world, more and more people are going to become impatient with the clinical setting, because it is very slow, and they are going to be seeking out these substances. And we want to make sure, if they do, that they have the most harm reduction information available. So what makes a good guide or a good facilitator? And this applies to the clinical, shamanic, as well as community setting. You want to make sure that the guide has done training and qualifications, and they are really grounded, that they're able to handle altered states of consciousness, that they're not brand new and have got caught up in the hype and are ready to give you a powerful substance without actually knowing the seriousness of it. These people need to be humble and reflective and careful, and to have a lot of practices. So it might be music, yoga, psychology, dance, creative arts. We encourage people to really do their homework and research the person that they're going to work with. How long have they worked with these medicines? Have they had these own experiences themselves? Are they trained medically? Do they know what to do in an emergency? And most importantly, are they humble, or are they what we call spiritual bypassing, which means they've got caught up in the hype, they think they're a healer, and they're giving out these medicines to people not knowing the sacredness and the seriousness of it all. So another thing to keep in mind from a harm reduction perspective is set, setting, and skill. So when you're choosing a psychedelic, it's really important to think about your set, so your mind. Do you have a diagnosis? Do you have any history of bipolar or schizophrenia in your family? What trauma, what complexity are you bringing to the medicine? And you've got to be completely honest about that with your team or your shaman or your guide. Don't hide anything, be honest. And then they can work with you around that. Are you bringing certain values and perspectives? Are you religious? Are you atheist? Are you clutching at this for the answer and could be really disappointed if it doesn't work? So the set is really about you being as honest as possible with what you need, who you are, what you value, and what type of medicine you're looking for. And some people, they want to do ayahuasca straight away, but then they realize that it's such a big medicine. Maybe they need to slow down. Maybe they need to start with CBD and THC to help regulate their body and be more calm, and maybe work up to MDMA so that they can know what it's like to talk about their trauma safely before they have one of those bigger medicines that takes them, out of their body and into different spiritual landscapes. So the set is one of the most important steps, doing all that research and homework about yourself and your needs. And it includes a lot of knowledge about the substance. So read, research, talk to people, talk to grounded people, and talk to people who've had bad experiences so that you're not just getting a one-sided view. It's really important. And the setting is also really crucial. Do you want to do this in a lab, in a trial, in the jungle, in a teepee, in nature? Do you want to do this home alone, with friends, at a ritual? Keep in mind the legalities around this and what that means for you and your family. But have a really good think about, where am I going to be most supported, safe, and get the most benefit? And what we find from people around the world is that they often end up doing different settings for different reasons, the more they get to know themselves and their mind. But you may need to consider your own sensory needs, being deaf and hearing impaired, or if there's any autism as well, because some of these situations might not be appropriate for you. They might be triggering or distressing. So ensuring that you've got access, that you've got someone who can communicate with you if you get scared or frightened, that you're in a setting that is really supportive for your needs. Another really important factor is skill. To take psychedelics requires a lot of skill. It's not just an antidepressant that you swallow in the morning and go about your day, which, although takes a lot of courage, psychedelics actually takes a lot of skills. And what we mean by that is a word called metacognitive skills. So it's your capacity to know your own mind, your thoughts, your feelings, your triggers, your biases, your parts. Being able to be open that sometimes you get angry, you get suicidal, you get depressed, stressed, having awareness of these states and how they impact you and those around you. So metacognitive skills is being able to talk about your thoughts and feelings and your mistakes and your regrets with a certain level of grit and resilience. You need some skills to be able to regulate. Psychedelics can be very powerful. They can be scary. You can get worse before you get better. So you need tools. You need to know how to breathe, to relax, to whether it's meditate, run, journal, and know how to ask for support when things get hard. So many therapists can spend a long time with the client working on the set as well as the skill before you actually take any psychedelics. And another important thing to remember is that there is this assumption that we have one mind. It's called the single self assumption. But what we know now with the theory internal family systems is that we're complex beings. We have multiplicity inside us. We have different roles. We can be, a mother, a daughter, a friend. We can, in the same time, be suicidal, depressed, anxious, even hopeful and happy. We can cycle through all those emotions and roles and parts in one day. So what can happen in psychedelics is you can experience that complexity, but magnified. And it can be absolutely incredible, but it can be really challenging because you're opening yourself up not only to the multiplicity of your own mind, but also the universal mind. So you can experience spiritual phenomena, historical, tribal, lineage, different cultures. You can even experience the pain of others that you never even think about, your ancestors or people at work, your children. You can step into the mind and the body of others, which is why it can be deeply healing and transformational, but it can be a lot to hold and navigate if you're not aware of that. So a big part of harm reduction is, are you aware of what you're opening yourself up to? We talk about people who get open heart surgery, and when you go into surgery, you require a lot of care. You go to hospital, you don't work, you get aftercare, you get nurses. Your family tend to care about you, look after you. When people take psychedelics, it really is open mind, heart, body, and spirit surgery, and it's not to be taken lightly. You can't just open yourself up like that and then the next day expect to be the same. You've got to allow time for the healing, and you've got to ensure that you've got the support and the culture around you to help put yourself back together. We say that the self is a narrative. So psychedelics help us to dissolve the self and to experience a bigger mind. So not just yourself, but the larger mind. And with the right skills, you can actually dissolve your story, your traumas, your pains, your regrets, your shame. And in the words of one of my mentors, you get the opportunity to create a new story. And you can take a lot of time really pondering, what story do I want to tell? What do I want to let go of? Who do I want to be? And that's the power of psychedelics, being able to dissolve old stories and move into the new. Just going a little bit deeper into metacognition for harm reduction. So it really is about becoming aware of your own mind, being able to reflect, track your thoughts, your feelings, and being really aware of everything about you, your family of origin, your attachment style. Are you anxious? Are you avoidant? Do you feel secure in your relationships? Or, are you disorganized? Do you have a lot of conflict in your life? This is really important information when you're preparing for psychedelics because you bring that to the medicine. So making sure that you're working closely with a therapist to sift through this detail so you can really know yourself with compassion and without shame. Safety is one of the most important things in psychedelics. Do you feel safe in the room, safe with your therapist, safe in the teepee, the jungle? Doesn't matter what context, but are you safe? And we encourage you not to rush this. It also means having appropriate boundaries and having therapists and support people around you that are clear. We need to make sure that people aren't engaging in any sexual conduct during psychedelics. People cannot consent to sex or sexual activity when they have taken a psychedelic, and no guide or true healer or clinical trial, none of that should be occurring. So just want to make that message really clear that these medicines are for healing and that sexual boundaries and safety needs to be maintained at all times. Trust is really important, trusting your team and learning to trust the medicine because it's hard. You might have a horrific journey, but you've got another appointment scheduled in the trial or in the retreat centre in the jungle. We just encourage you to trust your intention and listen to your body, and over time people can develop these trusting relationships with the medicine. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. There will be lots of trials and pain, but it is a relationship and it does require trust and commitment and willingness to work on it. It's not going to be a panacea, as we say. It's not going to be a silver bullet that's going to cure you. It's going to be a relationship that you have to learn to navigate. So now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into integration. And this is the after stages of the medicine, regardless if you are taking it at home or in the jungle or in ceremony or in a clinic. These are some really helpful harm reduction tools and tips to support you on that journey. So immediately after a psychedelic, it is really important that you try not to rush too quickly into trying to figure out what it all means, because that will bring the mind back online. And what we want to do in the first 3 days in particular, when your mind is open, your heart is open, your body is open, is to not shut it down. And there's many ways that you can shut it down. That's through technology, through being around people that are judgmental or difficult, getting back into work too quickly, certain foods, alcohol, caffeine and sugar. You really want to take time to slow down and to not rush to overthinking. You've just gone through a massive process, and there's some really beautiful practices that can help you drop deeper and deeper into the medicine. So it's really encouraged, as soon as you've had a psychedelic, to practically ground yourself with some healthy food, some water, good sleep, just being warm and comfortable. Those basic human essentials are really beautiful as soon as you've had a psychedelic. You should be around people, again, that are really supportive, not asking too many questions, not rushing you to explain yourself. If you can journal, not to make meaning, but just to express. Write about the symbols, write about the messages. Beautiful time to explore art and painting and drawing, sand, work, music, and just being with yourself and being with the journey. What we like to encourage people to do is to really nourish themselves. So allow time for the meaning to unfold. And this is in the second stage, where we call it stabilising the view. So this can come in the week after the psychedelic experience. So after you've spent time being creative and resting and nourishing yourself and exploring some of the themes, you can actually start talking about them in more depth. This is a great time for therapy and for really starting to tease out what you saw and what you experienced. And what does this actually mean for your life, for your values, for how you want to be in the world, for your spiritual beliefs? This is a great time to keep exploring meaning and feelings and your body. A lot of people love doing yoga and dance and movement practices. It's really important to not shut down, to remain open and move with the flexibility. What we know is that the first stages after a psychedelic is people can come out with some very big ideas. You know, I've had this dream, or I've been told by the medicine to quit my job or leave my partner. What we encourage people to do from a harm reduction perspective is don't rush. Don't sign any contracts. Don't make any big decisions. Don't break up or quit your job. Just be with the content. Allow it to simmer and reevaluate with your therapist a month later to see if it still stands. What we know in the psychedelic literature is that the medicine can present itself in various ways. It can be literal, so it can be you need to exercise more, you need to forgive yourself. Some very practical, literal guidance. It can also be archetypal. You might experience what it's like to be a father or a mother, but you may never be. It's just the medicine giving you that opportunity to explore that through the imagination and through symbols. It can also be a trickster. A lot of people have been told things, leave their job or start this business venture, and it actually hasn't been a good idea. It hasn't gone well. So this is where you need to have skill. We talked about metacognitive skill, and that actually means not rushing, not jumping to big conclusions, not believing everything that the medicine told you. You need to take time and have context and support and really play with the ideas, play with the phenomena. Some things in the medicine are just rubbish. I've had many journeys where It's just been pictures and images and cosmic junk, as we call it. And you can be curious about that. You can learn to enjoy that and play with it, but you don't have to take it literal and you don't have to make any big decisions. This is why it's really important to have a really solid integration specialist who can help you manage all that content. And again, just as you've taken the psychedelic and returning to the world, just making sure that you have safe people to talk to. There might be people in the deaf community that are really supportive of psychedelics, or there might be some that are really judgmental and think it's drugs, and your job or your childcare, your relationships in the community could be put at risk. So really assess the scene, assess your support, be careful of who you tell. And we also really warn people about, just because you've had a really profound experience, that doesn't mean you need to tell everyone about it, because some people will judge it and some people are not ready. My shaman says that the best way to tell people about psychedelics is to show them through your behaviour. So one day someone will say to you, "You're looking really well, you sound really happy and healthy. What is your secret?" That is your in. People are far more likely to listen to you when they can feel your change and see your change, as opposed to being told. So just be really careful of those relationships and who you're talking to, and protecting yourself. We also want to prepare for the afterglow. Sometimes people can feel amazing after psychedelics, and then there's a crash, and you might not remember the content as much, and it can start to fade away. That is really normal. You haven't done anything wrong, and it doesn't mean that the benefits aren't there. So it's really important that you're realistic, that most peak experiences fade, that the psychedelic content won't last forever, and that's why it's really important to have a therapist to help you take the messages and make them real, make them into the real world, into your work, your relationships, and how you see yourself. So be really aware of your ego coming back online, your mind, doubts and beliefs and negativity, depression, suicidal mind. But instead of judging it and being scared of it, know that it can shift and change, and that you have tools and that you're on this healing path. So just try and be really gentle and compassionate towards yourself. And we encourage you to, in the two weeks after the psychedelics, to just be really curious about your intention. You've been working with the intention with the medicine. What's happening in your life? What have you been able to face? What unresolved traumas are you working through? Spend a lot of time reflecting, journaling, and talking to your therapist. Be really grateful for your decision to take this step, and be curious about how you're moving about in the world. What has changed? Might be really subtle or might be really strong. Be careful of temptations, addictions and the things that have held you back, and just approach them with curiosity and with your therapist. So typically in the psychedelic trials, people do 1 or 2 doses a month apart. So they allow space in between the dose sessions, and they have a lot of psychological support around that. But what we know is in the community, people often do multiple psychedelics in one day or throughout different months of the year. There's pros and cons, of course, to this, and you need to be very careful with mixing psychedelics. Always get, medical advice for that. But ultimately, it is your choice. And from a harm reduction perspective, we just ask you to really reflect on why are you taking the medicine? What's your intention? And is there more work to be done actually in integration? Have you put in the lessons from the last journey? Have you reflected? Have you done the hard work? Because these medicines are a vehicle. They're not a panacea. You actually have to do the work as well. And it's really important that you have the right relationship with the medicine before you take it again. Another incredible tool is nature. We know that nature is a therapist of its own, and we are so disconnected in Australia and in our modern culture from nature. Capitalism and working hard, technology has pulled us away from just time in nature. And in the jungle and in South America and Mexico and all around the world, people use these medicines in community, in nature, with fire, with water, with mountains and the elements. So from a harm reduction perspective, I really encourage people to be more connected to the natural world. You can do this through walking, through meditation, through feeling connected to animal totems, different elements, and also different practices, such as working with art and with a mesa. There's a picture there that I have of my own nature-based practice where in Peruvian culture, they have mesas and you put all your special items in this cloth bundle and spend time in prayer and meditation and using different nature-based elements to meditate with. And we know that this can help people drop into stillness and mindfulness, declutter the mind, and feel more connected to nature and part of the larger world. We also know that nature journaling is incredible after doing a psychedelic medicine, just being in nature and listening to her, seeing the wind, the trees, the earth, like Indigenous elders and communities have been talking about for thousands of years. Plug back into this natural resource, and we know that can help reduce mental illness. You won't feel so alone, you'll feel part of this ecosystem. Nature photography and collaging, swimming, forest bathing, silent walking, fires and drumming, all these tools are incredible for the integration phase and to help you fall in love not just with the psychedelic, but the medicines that are available to us all. We're all medicine carriers in our own way. It doesn't have to be through a substance. It can be through a drum. It can be through a guitar. It can be through sign language, through all these different ways of feeling connected and plugged in to our natural world. And food as medicine, really important when people are engaging in psychedelics, that they're also intentional with what they're putting in their bodies. You know, if you're taking psilocybin but filling yourself with coffees and junk foods and sugars and online gambling, etc., there's only so much the medicine can do. You need to try and work towards your temple being as open and healthy and clear as possible. And nature and these medicines will reward you. And from a harm reduction perspective, you will go further with the integration phase if you look after yourself with nutrition and nature and being mindful with what you put in your body. We say that with enlightenment comes the laundry. And what that means is you might have the most incredible peak experience, but you're still going to have to do the laundry the next day. You're still going to have to pay your taxes, deal with your family. You're still going to have to deal with trauma of being a human being and the complex mystery that we're all a part of, living and one day having to face our own death. But what psychedelics can help is your relationship to suffering. It can help it be an ally and a friend and a teacher, and not something we have to fear. We can learn to walk much closer with suffering and find the magic in the mystery. So just from a harm reduction perspective, be realistic about your psychedelic work. It's not going to take away the pain of the world, but it can really shift how you react to it. Learn to walk with paradox. There's pain and there's joy. There's escalation and there's progress. You might get worse before you get better. Be really clear with your boundaries and who you're around. Look after yourself, how people treat you. Learn to respect yourself more, and you will feel those rewards in the medicine. And just track your healing progress, your parts, your mind, your body, your health and well-being. Just become really aware of what you're working with. And again, when you change, your family changes around you. Psychedelics might be profoundly triggering for those that care about you. And there might be even some people that gaslight you or undermine you. They might joke, they might mock you, they might judge you, or their religious or political beliefs might challenge you. But as mentioned, just be the change in your actions, in how you speak, and how you show up in the world, and the rest will slowly take care of itself. So just in closing, we really want to emphasise the potential of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy really has the capacity to shift away from the current psychiatric model, which is medication and symptom suppression and coping with mental illness, into thriving and a relational model. We're moving from resistance into facing our fears and openness, from disconnection to connection and to relationality, to taking these medicines so that we connect more with ourselves, with the natural world, with history, with archetypes, with spiritual phenomena. From rumination to being responsive and creating a new story, breaking away from who we thought we once were into endless possibilities. And most importantly, from self-definition, from labelling yourself as mentally ill, traumatised, depressed, into self-agency, into an empowered being with consciousness that can change and shift anything with the imagination, with healing, with safe people, and with the magic of this community and all the medicines that it brings. So I want to take a moment to thank everyone for this production, for the deaf community who have taught me so much over the last 15 years, and the incredible stillness and joy I get from AUSLAN as a language, very spiritual language for me, to be able to connect with people in that way. And it is my hope that as these treatments move around the world, we make sure they're accessible for everyone, and the deaf community, if needed, can access these medicines safely. Also, I want to thank the Daily Grind for funding this opportunity and making this resource accessible to the deaf community.